To disassemble and assemble your Apple iPhone 5, you will need a pentalobe, small Phillips and bladed screwdriver, and your SIM card removal tool. You'll also need a sucker tool of some kind. This is from a windscreen mount. You could use a sat-nav one or a fridge one, or sometimes they supply one of these with a new screen. You'll also need a screw size flowchart, which you can print from the description below, and then you can apply double-sided tape so the screws don't slide and get mixed up. If you do get the screws mixed up, you can use this digital caliper to measure the screw sizes. So start by making sure that the phone is completely shut down, holding the power button, and power that off. Now we can remove the two pentalobe screws at the bottom. These screwdrivers normally come supplied with a new screen. These are the only two pentalobe screws used in the phone, so you can't get them mixed up with the others. Now take your sucker tool and place it quite close to the home key and lock it into place. You can use tape on the screen if it's broken. Now hold your hand on the top to keep it pressed together and try and lift the bottom up from the casing. Just move it about and it'll pop open. Take off your sucker tool and carefully open up the phone, and try not to damage the foam gasket that's on the back of the camera at the top here. To remove the battery, we need to undo these three screws. These are all different sizes, so make sure you place them onto your screw size flowchart. Now, using a plastic tool, gently lift the battery connector up so it disconnects, and gently pull on this plastic tag and that will lift the battery up. It's not stuck on too hard, that'll come away quite easy. Now we can remove the cover that holds the screen connectors in place. Again, all these screws are slightly different sizes, so keep track of where they go and place them onto your flowchart. You could use blue tack where the screw holes are on your flowchart instead of double tape. And this metal cover is hooked on from the bottom, so just push it slightly over and that will lift away. Now we can disconnect the screen connectors. So using a plastic tool, gently lift that up. This is for the earpiece and front camera. This is your main display connector here, and finally this is for the digitizer. Just lift that away. To see how to exchange all the components over to a new screen, you can follow the link in the description or at the top of the video. To remove the docking port, headphone socket or loudspeaker, we need to undo these screws at the bottom. There's a few different sizes, so it's important not to get them mixed up. It is possible to replace the loudspeaker without removing the docking port and headphone jack. To see how to do this, you can follow the link in the description or at the top of the video. Now we can disconnect the antenna cable. So using a flat bladed screwdriver, gently lift the antenna connection up and push that aside. Now we can remove the loudspeaker, and be careful, it's still attached to a ribbon cable. Now we need to release this ribbon connector. Just gently lift that up, and it's held down with double-sided tape, so gently pull and using your screwdriver lift the ribbon cable away from the casing. Make sure that the headphone jack and the microphone are released, and this can be a little bit tricky. If you insert a blade underneath the docking port and just gently lift, that will come away. Now be careful, there's 4 silver washers that go on each of the docking port screw holes, and they're quite small and very easy to lose. There's one missing on the casing just here. So if I look on the docking port, we find that it's still attached. So try not to lose these, as we'll put them on a bit later. Now we need to undo these slotted screws. These can be a bit tricky to undo, but take your time and find a screwdriver that's wide enough to fill the whole screw. These two are almost the same size. So it doesn't matter if you get these two mixed up. Now fold this plastic battery tab out of the way. Just stick that down onto the double tape and undo this single screw here. Now's a good time to remove the SIM tray. So using your removal tool, just pop that out and put that aside. Now we need to remove these antenna ribbon cables. So gently disconnect these and they're very lightly stuck down with double-sided tape. This is the ribbon connector for the volume and silent button. Push that back and remove these two ribbon cables. Now we can get to another screw. And at the top we have another one of those slotted screws. This one's made of stainless steel, so the magnetic screwdriver doesn't work on it. So you can use tweezers to lift this one out. Now we need to remove this metal cover at the top, just held in with two screws, slightly different size from each other. Now we need to undo these two antenna screws at the top. These screws are slightly different sizes from each other, so try not to get them mixed up. And these connect the antenna to the casing. And before we lift the mainboard up, you need to make sure the LED flash is lifted away. So lift that away from the reflector. Don't worry if the reflector comes out with it. Make sure this metal earthing clip is moving freely, and that's going to lift up as we lift the mainboard up. So gently lift it up, and be careful not to put too much strain on this antenna connection. Once you've got that open, use a small bladed screwdriver and gently disconnect the antenna cable. And now we have the mainboard free of the casing. If you need to replace your camera, then we need to undo these two screws at the top here. So gently lift the cover off and gently pry the ribbon connector open, and then you can replace the camera if you need to. So put that back into place, replace that metal cover, and only do the screws up finger tight, as they're not very tight to undo. These two antenna connections at the top possibly for the 4G radio. Now if you need to replace your power switch, silent switch or volume keys, then we need to remove the ribbon behind. Start by undoing these two screws. These hold the rear facing microphone in place. This screw is one of the normal Phillips screws, and this top screw that I'm undoing now would normally be one of those slotted screws, which I forgot to put in when I was shooting this part. So put that little bracket aside. Now to remove the power switch, we need to undo this Phillips screw at the top. This can be a little bit tricky to do. And this has a pivot, has a hinge in the corner, so we need to remove the LED flash lens to allow it to pivot open. So just gently lift that up and make a mental note of which way around that goes. It's got the reflector going towards the back of the phone. Now gently lift the ribbon cable up. Just double-sided tape holding that down. And be gentle near the power switch. And then you can lever that down, but lift this up first so it's not caught on those screw posts. And we need to bring that quite far down to unhook from the hinge in the corner. Once that's released, you can remove your power switch. The little bar goes towards the front of the phone. Now we can undo these screws that hold the vibrating motor in place. There's a few different sizes, so make sure you don't get them mixed up. And the final screw. Now we can lift the vibrating motor from the case. This little metal bracket is held on with double-sided tape. You might have to switch that over to your new motor if you're replacing that. And just put that aside. Now we can remove the rest of the screws. These hold the bracket on that keeps the silent switch and the volume keys in place. And the final screw. And before we lift this ribbon cable away, I'm going to remove this metal earthing clip. So if you lift the antenna cable out of the clip and then put that aside, now we can release the ribbon cable. And this is one of the antennas here. I believe this is for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Just gently lever that off if you're replacing the case. And put that aside. Now we can lift the ribbon cable assembly out. These are the connections for the vibrating motor at the top here. And if you're replacing the ribbon assembly, you may have to switch over the volume switches to the metal plate. These just lift off quite easily, and then you might have to remove some protective coating on your new switches and line up those small holes in the switches with the metal case. The silent switch has a little metal plate which you may have to switch over to a new ribbon, and your power switch, again, you may have to lift this off if you're replacing it. And then off your new one in place, making sure that small hole lines up. Give it a firm push down to make sure it's stuck in place. To reassemble, offer your volume switch into the case, making sure the plus goes towards the top. Then take your silent switch, making sure the orange bit goes towards the front of the phone. Then bring your switches in place and line them up and put those screws back in again. Just finger tight, don't go too mad. Once you've put these screws back in, make sure the silent switch still works okay and that the volume buttons feel okay. Gently line the ribbon cable up, making sure that's sitting down nicely, and don't push it fully down yet. We need to replace the power switch first. So place that into the casing with the metal bracket pointing towards the front of the phone. You could use a bit of tape to hold it in place, or here I'll turn the phone upside down. Now this can be quite tricky. We need to hook this metal bracket into the case. So line that up and hook that round into that little bar, and be careful not to put too much stress on the ribbon cable. And once that's down, make sure that that hook is around that bar in the corner, and the microphone is in position. So So replace that single screw. And now we can push the ribbon cable all the way down. Just pin that back for now. Make sure the ribbon cable's sitting down nice and flat, and that all the switches feel like they're working okay. Now we can replace that Wi-Fi antenna. Just line it up. And then give it a gentle push down. Now we can put the microphone bracket back on. This can be quite tricky, so make sure the foam pad goes towards the top, and take the single bottom screw, place it into the bracket, and then just offer that in with a few turns on the screw, and we can swing that round. Notice that the wider part goes towards the top of the phone. Now we need to put that slotted screw into the top. Can be a little bit difficult doing this. Just finger tight. Now finally tighten up this screw at the bottom. Once you're happy that's all sitting down nicely, we can replace the LED reflector. So make sure the reflector goes towards the back of the phone. Give that a gentle push down into place. Now we can replace the main board. Start by reconnecting that Wi-Fi antenna cable and gently bring that round. Line the camera up and lower it down into place. Now we can replace that metal earthing bracket. So place it round so the cable can clip back into it again. It's a little bit fiddly. And push that cable down. Now we can replace the LED flash. Just give that a gentle push down to stick it in place. And we can start replacing some of the brackets and screws. So line this up. Just finger tight is fine. This is that stainless steel screw that won't stick to a magnet. just replacing all those screws that hold the main board on. The Phillips ones are quite easy, but the slotted ones can be a little bit tricky. Don't do them up too tight, just a gentle finger tight is fine. Now we can replace those two screws that connect the antenna to the casing. Now we can replace the vibrating motor. So line it up so the bracket lines up with the holes in the casing. And then take one of the screws, just do that finger tight. Now we can replace those antenna ribbon connectors, making sure that the shorter one is on the top. Make sure they snap down into place. Now we can replace those silver washers on the docking port. Make sure they line up on the raised screw posts, and take your time and don't rush. Make sure they're sitting nice and central. And to make things a little bit easier, we can remove the loudspeaker from the ribbon cable. So gently separate that ribbon using a screwdriver. Just leave that away and you'll find that makes it much easier to put back together. If you are replacing the docking port assembly, you may need to switch over the rubber microphone gasket to your new one. So just pull it off and make sure the small hole lines up with the hole in the rubber gasket. Now we can replace the assembly into the case. So be careful not to move those silver washers, and bring the ribbon underneath that corner of the main board. Just bringing it down. Final check to make sure those washers are still in place. And using a small screwdriver, make sure this rubber gasket for the microphone is seating all the way down onto the housing. If you push this down a bit, you'll see that's now located a bit further in, and the screw holes line up nicely. So make sure everything lines up, and gently push the ribbon cable down onto the double-sided adhesive underneath. And now we can plug that ribbon cable back in again. So line it up gently and then snap it into place. Once that's pushed down nicely, we can replace the loudspeaker. So make sure you put that little plastic tag towards the main board, and here it's not lined up, but if you move it to the outside edge just underneath that little socket for the antenna, that'll slide all the way in. So bring it all the way down. Make sure the headphone jack is pushed all the way in, and put this little ribbon back. Make sure that little pin comes through that hole, and give that gentle push down. Now we can replace all the screws. Just finger tight is plenty. This one can be a little bit tricky. If you get the screw in to the ribbon first, just place that in and push it down and screw that into place. Putting this screw in can be a little bit tricky. If you put the screw in first and then swing that round, and that makes it quite a bit easier. Make sure that's pushed all the way in. Final check to make sure they're finger tight, and now we can reconnect the antenna cable. So line that up as much as you can and just gently push down. Don't force it. If it won't go in, just move it around a little bit more. Now we can reconnect this ribbon for the volume and silent switch. Again, just line it up and just gently push down until it snaps into place. You can stick this foam back down again if you need to. Now we can reconnect the screen. Start by plugging in the digitizer. Make sure that's pushed all the way down, and you plug in the display. And finally the earpiece, forward facing camera and the proximity sensor. Then we can replace that cover, putting the bottom in first and sliding it up as it locks in at the bottom here. Now we can replace the battery. Make sure it sits nice and central. And then gently line that up and push that down into place. And need to replace those two metal covers. To make things a little bit easier, put the center screw in first, and that will help keep them in place. And this is the final internal screw. Just make sure they're all done up finger tight. So a final visual check to make sure that everything's okay. Then bring the screen down. Make sure you place the top in first. So it has little locators on the case. And make sure it's nice and flush, and then bring down both sides, just gradually squeezing it together, and we can switch it on, and while that's booting up we can replace those screws at the bottom. So place the screw onto the pentalobe screwdriver. Just finger tight. And there we have a fully restored phone. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and give me the thumbs up, and I'll do my best to make some more.